In Charm's car, I sat in the cup holder while sitting on the Rethin device. At first, Charm wanted to set me away from the Rethin device, but when he saw that I started screaming, he kept me with the device, and as he drove us to Fort Zipacna, I stared at the timer, ticking upwards. The individual seconds and minutes were the most fascinating things I ever saw in my life. I tried to think back to what the rabbit said about the Rethin device. What did she say would happen if the device wore out in time? Would I be able to fix what happened? I always figured if the timer ran out, I would be able to go back to my original size. I never thought I would be stuck at this size. Still, though, with a few minutes to process it, I realized how bad my situation was. Charm In could barely hear me, and only if I was loud and he was leaning in close. Hush was so much larger than me now. She wouldn't be able to see me, hear me, or even feel me. I could be standing on her finger, screaming for her attention, and she would never notice me. The distance between us was even more now than it was a few hours ago. I had hoped that I could use the Rethin device to be closer to her size, even if just for a short time, but at least back then she could see me and touch me. But now, tears fell from my eyes as I watched the timer reach 30 minutes. Instead of it stopping, though, it kept going. 31 minutes, then 32 minutes. The Rethin device never went above 30 minutes before. The face had time above 30 minutes, but I didn't think it was possible. I had a lot to learn about the Rethin device. Maybe there was a way to go back to my normal size, or even get to Hush's size. That flicker warmed my heart as I looked around my surroundings. Charm's cup holder was actually pretty nasty. I could see small sticky remnants of leftover food and dried drink. Dust was now much larger, looking more like pebbles to me, and it clung to everything. The plastic had so many tiny scratches that would be invisible to the human eye, but at my scale it was clear and offered hand and footholds if I wanted to climb up. Looking closely at the Rethin device, I noticed something odd. The device was perfectly smooth. The ridges on the buttons were clear. There was no dirt, no tarnish, no dust, not even oil or fingerprints. I knew the device was durable. However, I didn't think it was this durable, invulnerable to the point where not even my fingerprints are left on the device. Maybe the device's invulnerability could be useful to me. My thoughts wandered on that, trying to ignore the fact that Hush and I were now separated when we just finally started dating. When we made it to Fort Zipacna, Charm was nice enough to describe what was happening for me, since I couldn't even reach the top of the cup holder to see beyond his cup holder. All I could see was the gray ceiling of his car. The guards asked him his business, and he told them Hush was expecting him, which thankfully worked, and he drove into the fort across the drawbridge. He then parked the car and picked up the device with me still on top of it. He kept his hand, thankfully, fairly still, and even as we passed by other members of the vanguard, no one gave him a second look nor bothered to notice me on the device. Being only a centimeter tall meant I was quite easy to miss and much easier to ignore. Maybe this would be helpful if I was going to spy on someone, but my thoughts were interrupted when we made it to Hush's hangar. Charmin waved Hush over. At a distance, I could mostly see her, but as she got closer and closer, she got harder and harder to comprehend. She got on her knees to whisper to Charm In, and I could see the vague shape and color of her face. The details of what she looked like was beyond my ability to see. I could focus on a few small parts of her, such as how deep her eyes looked now, no longer deep pools, but endless ocean. Her smile went from dazzling to terrifying, and the quiet power she possessed before became incomprehensible to me now. My girlfriend was now a lot closer to a cosmic horror than the girl next door at this scale, and yet my heart still beats like a flaggerdoot of jackalopes just being near her. I stared up at her while Charm In and Hush tried to talk. "Where's Birthstone?" Hush asked with worry in her voice. Her voice echoed around me like I was in a concert hall, and I wanted to tell her that I was okay, that I was here right now, but I couldn't. The pain of the one you love is so close and yet so unreachable. I could perceive her, but she couldn't perceive me. I didn't know my heart could ache so much, even though I was so close. Birthstone is right here in my hand. Something happened with Violent Valiant, and now she's stuck at her minimum size, but she's hoping to let some time pass and see if she can use her size changing device to change her own size. Charm explained, and I yelled up at him. "Tell her it was Violent Valiant's doing, and we should prepare for an attack within a few days." I yelled up at to him, and his face turned pale as he spoke up to Hush. "You can't hear her because she's so small, but she said it was Violent Valiant's fault, and there's going to be an attack in a few days, so we should prepare," he told Hush, and her face became concerned. "Birthstone, I'm so very sorry. If I knew this was going to happen, I wouldn't have let you go there alone. We will find a way to get you back to normal," she said, and I whispered to myself, "No rush." Whether or not I was being sarcastic to myself, I honestly couldn't answer. I did have hope with the Rethin device still ticking, so Charm, Hush, and I began to plan against the future attack. Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship didn't let assets go easily. They were willing to fight for them. However, they also believed in a measured and never rushed response, and that was our best bet. Sure, they weren't going to attack today because they knew we would expect them to, so most likely they would give us a few days to get lulled into a false sense of security before they finally decided to attack. They would have the advantage of preparation, and so would we. They would know by the time Violent Valiant got home that I was no longer there, and neither was the Rethin device. So while they wouldn't know where I was for sure, they would attack Hush believing that she would have information. Though at this time they didn't know anything about any weaknesses of hers. And to the best of my knowledge, there wasn't a single person in the entire academy who could even get close to Hush's level of power. The key phrase being single person. If you started considering teams of people, then I could figure out who was most likely going to be sent. Teams were usually composed of 3 people, chosen for maximum adaptability and tactile strength by working together. If you simply took the 3 strongest or the 3 smartest people, they were actually more likely to clash with each other than with their enemies. So personalities counted even more than ability, considering everything Violent Valiant was going to be their heavy hitter. He was the most familiar with both the area and with the person of interest, me. His formulas would give him a wide range of abilities, so he would potentially adapt to any situation. His intelligence, however, meant that he would barely be able to think tactically about the one he was fighting. So his inability to think strategically or improvise would have to be compensated for by someone who could think strategically, but also think quickly enough to communicate it in terms that Valiant could process effectively. There was only one personality I knew about who could fit that requirement so well: the Silver Trickster, an exime who had their ability to process information several times faster than most neurotypical people. Their strength and other physical abilities were slightly better than a Typicam. However, it was their mind where they thrived. They were able to solve complicated problems quicker than most, and they showed a great talent for thinking on their feet. However, even though their mind was faster than most, they weren't smarter than most, even though it looked that way to most. To clarify, they retained information as well as anyone else, and they were really bad at planning things out. Seriously, planning a birthday party with them was like trying to pull teeth, since they couldn't figure out what time worked out best for everyone. This definitely showed during tests because even though the Silver Trickster always finished first, they usually got only an average score. I would consistently score much higher, even if I was slower. Not to mention the fact that they thought so fast oftentimes meant that they second guessed themselves, or worse, outsmarted themselves into doing something stupid because they went 5 layers deep on a 2-layer problem. And then there was the final member of the team, someone whose personality was compatible with everyone else, but who would need to have a power that would compensate for the Silver Trickster. Quite possibly the most powerful exime in the Academy. Not necessarily the strongest, not necessarily the flashiest, but definitely one of the greatest abilities I had seen in the Academy. Phoenix Fire. Her whole story was a mystery. However, from what I knew, she was centuries old, if not millennia old. Every time the end of her life approached, she would immolate herself, and from her ashes she would be reborn as an infant. And then she would be raised by her own cult of worshippers that she had built across the centuries. Her powers were in her control of pyrokinesis and fire generation. I had seen her create pillars of fire that reached nearly 30 meters high and 5 meters across. I had seen her create flames hot enough to burn steel, and she was both fireproof and heatproof, for as long as she was able to focus on being immune to it. Her ability to think strategically and even tactically was quite advanced, and combined with her control over flames, she was practically unstoppable. The only weakness I could really think of was she could focus on making her flames hot, or she could focus on making them big. She couldn't do both. So while the pillars of fire were quite massive, they only burned at 525 degrees Celsius, which still burned pretty hot, but it wasn't enough to burn steel, such as her small white hot flames, or the fires she was rumored to create that were so hot that it was invisible to the human eye, much like a hydrogen fire. If there was anyone in the Academy powerful enough to hurt Hush, it was going to be Phoenix Fire. So I shared this information with Charm, who shared it with Hush. Before we knew it, Hush became a part of the Vanguard, and he was the brand new liaison between Hush, the Vanguard, and I. What my new role was, I don't know. But they were still auto-depositing checks into my bank account for the same amount, so I didn't mind that much. Still, even as the first few days passed, I finally had an idea. I asked Charm to bring me close to Hush, and I adjusted the Rethin device. It was a struggle to move the buttons, but with my new size set for 152 centimeters, I pressed the button to change my size, and sure enough, the tingling returned. I was now tall enough Hush could see me. I grabbed the now small Rethin device and pocketed it. Still, though, I was aware of the fact that the Rethin device was now counting down rather than up. I had 3 days worth of time on the device before I grew to my normal size. However, it was now reading that I only had 36 minutes at this size. So, I was intending on using it correctly with Hush. Tears in her eyes, she gently wrapped her fingers around me and lifted me up to her chest for me to be held close to her heart. And we stayed that way for a few minutes before we finally spoke about what was unspoken. Do you think it's permanent? Hush asked me, and I shrugged. I I don't know. It feels permanent. Even now my time is counting down, and only at a centimeter tall does my time increase. And I don't know why, but it seems the bigger I make myself, the more time I have to spend at a centimeter tall. I looked up into her tearful eyes, looking down at me, and I gently tapped her chin. 3 whole days at a centimeter tall, and I only get 36 minutes with you, beautiful. But if I can tell you a secret? I asked, and she nodded, her voice gone for the moment. Every second I spend with you is worth so much more to me than all of the years in Agamemnon's. Thank you for saving me. I reached up as high as I could, and I left a kiss on her upper lip. When I relaxed down, she squeezed me a bit against her chest. Enough to force my muscles to relax, but not enough to hurt me or even worry me. I made a promise, and I will keep it. We will find a way to fix your problem and help you get back to normal size, permanently. While I love what the Rethin device does for you, I don't like what it did to you. She gently stroked my cheek with her finger, and I leaned into her fingers with my eyes closed. I hadn't been treated so gently in all of my life, and I never would have believed it was possible. To know that I cannot see your beautiful face, to know that you can be so close to me and I can't see you, it's heartbreaking, Amarali. You deserve so much better than what happened. While it is lovely to hold you like this, parting is such sweet sorrow, she said, just as the fire alarm began to blare. I could hear the vanguard yelling about a fire heading towards Fort Zipacna. As much as I wanted to stay here with Hush and wear down all the time that I had left with her, I knew that we had a greater responsibility, and by us winning, we would have more time in the future. But still, it was such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow, I told Hush, who left a kiss on my cheek as I slid down and ran towards Charm, just outside the room. Hush was already making her way out to the doors. When I was in front of Charm, I shrank back down to 1 centimeter, and I asked him to take me to the security room. If I wasn't able to fight, I was going to offer the best advice I could. Thankfully, the Rethin device shrank with me this time. The security room was built in a hidden section of Fort Zipacna, a safe room a lot of people tended to call the panic room. In it was just me and Charm. In as I watched Hush on the cameras, I spoke to Charm who spoke to Hush on the radio. She had an earpiece in her ear, and sadly, we were still waiting on making a workable radio for my size. In the camera, I could see Hush on the other side of the river and facing Phoenix Fighter. Phoenix Fire wore a modified firefighter's uniform, but instead of the symbol of the Vanguard in a circle, it was a flaming phoenix inside a cartouche. Cartouches were the symbol, most often, used by villains. Around Phoenix's body, there was a dimly humanoid shape made out of flames. It was dull-colored, but it also stood 20 meters tall, just a bit shorter than Hush. I could see over the camera that Hush was already sweating, even though she wasn't near the flames. She needs to be careful. The flames can get hotter, but they need to get smaller. If she can take Phoenix out, then the fight is over. But she also needs to watch out for the other two. The Silver Trickster is probably far from the fight, but still in a place where he can offer advice. And Violent Valiant will be looking for a fight. I told Hush, through Charmin. I could see her subtly nod on the screen, and as Phoenix Fire approached Hush, I saw her prepare to run. As she braced her feet and ran towards Phoenix as fast as she could. She only took a single step before she rose into the air, her feet no longer touching the ground, and seemingly pulled up by a mysterious force. Violent Valiant. I didn't realize his telekinesis grew this strong. We need to find him, I told Charm, as Hush struggled in the air to find purchase. Unable to find any, I winced as the flaming construct lowered its hot hand towards Hush's face, and I saw Hush's struggle not to scream as the flames burned her face. Hush was durable in a lot of ways with her increased size. Bullets and blades didn't have much of an effect against skin that was nearly half a meter thick. However, skin burns at the same temperature, and even if it takes a long time to get anything vital, didn't make it a downside. It just meant that she could be tortured longer before she passed out or died. And torturing her was probably allowed, at least somewhat. Still, there had to be something I could do. Check the other cameras, I yelled up at Charm. What are we looking for? He asked, toggling through the many cameras as quickly as he could, as I did my best to analyze them in just a fraction of a second, thin slicing information and trying to find out where both Silver Trickster and Violent Valiant were. If Valiant was lifting up Hush with his telekinesis, then he had to have her in easy view. He couldn't use telekinesis on things he couldn't see. Even glass would act as interference, so he wasn't inside of a building. And with a stronger ability meant a stronger chem. Stronger chems lasted less time, so he would have to be taking it nearly non-stop to keep this going. He was the most vulnerable one right now, and the one we would need to take out if we wanted Hush to have a chance against Phoenix Fire. We're looking for a man who is dousing himself and staring intensely at Hush while it is happening. That will be Violent Valiant. We scrolled through, and I had him stop at the camera just outside the drawbridge on the other side of the river. Sitting just off the footpath hidden from street view, but with an easy view of Hush, sat Violent Valiant in a modified chair with 4 IV lines dripping into him. The Silver Trickster was completely covered and their form unknown to most. They were capable of talking, but rarely did it unless absolutely necessary. Something to do with their high thought processing speed? The IV drips were of greater concern to me. If Violent Valiant had graduated from drinking the chem into injecting it, then he was looking for a much stronger dose. And the IVs were likely mixed with some saline to keep him from dehydrating himself, since the formula for giving himself telekinesis was saltier than drinking brine. Now we knew where they were, but what could we do? Charm was athletic from being a dancer, but he was not going to overpower 2 different Exime. But I did see that they were near a speaker, and I had another idea. Charm, access the intercoms and startle them. We need to get Valiant to break his focus, I told Charm, who nodded and pressed the intercom button before he spoke. Attention, shoppers, would the Silver Valiant and the Violent Trickster please get off our lawn? He said, and for a brief moment Valiant looked up at the PA speaker, and that moment caused Hush to crash back on the ground. And in that moment, she had no hesitation as she kicked the figure within the flaming construct and kicked them straight into a building through the plate glass. Did Hush just kill that woman? Charm asked with the speaker still on, and I yelled at him to kill the speaker. Thankfully, he did, as I explained. Phoenix Fire is famously immortal. She's fine. She was willing to kill Hush, and she was just defending herself. Now, we just have to deal with Violent Valiant and the Silver Trickster. That'll be easier, I assured him and myself, only for Charm to quip. The guy who was just lifting her entire body with his mind. Yeah, that'll be an easy fight, he said sarcastically. I said it would be easier, not that it would be easy, I reminded him as I watched Valiant refocus his efforts on Hush. But she was ready this time. As she started to float up, she kicked a car towards him, and he focused his telekinesis on stopping the car from hitting him, which stopped him from focusing on her as she ran towards him at full speed. I wasn't a fan of property damage, but sometimes it would have to happen for Hush to survive. And I would rather deal with insurance companies than deal with arranging Hush's funeral. Hush has got this. She got this, I told myself as she ran forward, preparing to kick both Violent Valiant and the Silver Trickster. In that moment, I saw how much rage Hush had contained within herself. She was angry at Valiant. The anger wasn't personal, but she was angry on my behalf. After everything he did to me, she was fully willing to kill, to protect me, and to keep it from ever happening again. Before Hush had time to strike her killing blow, Valiant raised both of his hands in a striking motion, and she went flying into the building across the way. Her head cracked against the plate glass, causing it to shatter, as her head slammed against the concrete floors, and she wobbled in the street, barely able to stand. She was clearly hit hard by that attack, a lot harder than I was expecting. What's happening? I watched her tear through a building with her bare arms. Why did that hurt her? Charm asked me, and I shook my head as I explained. Her brain. Her brain? What do you mean? The brain's durability only scales up so much. It's extremely easy to get brain damage because the brain can rattle inside the skull, even if the skin and skull is untouched. Even at superhuman levels of durability, the brain can handle only so much punishment before it gets damaged. She was just slammed into a building with her entire body weight behind it. Quite frankly, the fact she is still awake is a testament to how durable it is. We have to help her. How are we going to help her? We'll get killed out there, Charm said, and I glanced down at the Rethin device in my hand. The time had continued to tick up since I came to a centimeter tall, but it wasn't nearly as high as it was when I first grew to spend time with Hush. I'm so sorry, Hush, I whispered as I quickly adjusted my size to 5 feet tall. Keep an eye on the cameras, and when the fight is over, inform the marshal. What are you going to do? Charm asked me as he watched both Valiant and Silver Trickster approach Hush, who was still wobbling and no longer focused on the fight anymore, likely forgetting even where she was. I'm going to end this fight, one way or the other, I told Charm as I quickly left the safe room and I made my way to the drawbridge. I would be taking a lot of risks here, risks that both my training and my instincts were screaming at me not to take. Risks I was going to take to keep Hush safe. In that moment, I felt probably what Hush felt when she was attacking Violent Valiant and Silver Trickster. I was still processing what happened with Valiant and I. I knew that I was hurt, but in that moment, I felt a lot more hurt by watching Hush get hurt. It's odd how pain works that way sometimes. You can put up with so much happening to yourself that you just get numb to it. But then you see someone you care about, someone you love, get hurt less than you got hurt, and something in you just snaps, and you decide that you don't want to see them in any pain. So I would push the Rethin device and myself to the limit, if not beyond. Now outside, I could see both of them approach Hush cautiously, still afraid that she would lash out or even step on them. However, she was still unaware enough that she was still wobbling. I had to be very quick so that Silver Trickster couldn't come up with a weakness, and so Violent Valiant couldn't use his telekinesis on me. I set my Rethin device for maximum size and I did some quick calculations. I would have 2, maybe 3 minutes at my maximum size of 18.28 meters, or 12 times my normal height. My new size set, I pressed the button for my adjustment as I ran towards them. In that moment, I could feel the power fill my body as I leapt across the river. I stamped down hard, knocking down both of them. I knew Valiant was confused, so I quickly scooped them both up in my hands, careful not to let any light in. If Violent Valiant couldn't see me, he couldn't use telekinesis on me. My fingers tightened against both of them as I felt their bones underneath my fingers. It would be so easy to kill them both, and then I could just wash my hands of them, both literally and metaphorically. They attacked me, and they weren't shy about killing Hush to get to me. And they weren't shy about killing me to get to Hush. I could kill them so easily, and I don't even think I would feel guilty about it. I was so full of anger that it felt like it was going to spill over. But something stopped my hand. Violence for violence was the rule of beasts, the law of Agamemnon's academy. They would sacrifice me and kill as many people as it would take to hurt someone else. It was one thing to kill someone in a fight because they were trying to hurt you, but it was something else to execute them. I was a villain for a long time, not caring about the people I hurt to get what I wanted or to do my job. It was just me following orders, or at least it was what I told myself. But now, with no orders, I held life in my hands. All I had to do was squeeze it a little bit, and I would end it. I looked at Hush still swaying there, and I knew deep in my heart what I was going to choose. I wanted to stop being a villain, and that wasn't as simple as changing the shape of my sigil and where I got my paycheck. Being a villain was a lot like being a sword. You pointed yourself where you wanted to hurt others, and you cut them. Being a hero was a lot like being a shield. You were protecting others, even if it meant that you were going to get hit and pushed against by the people you were protecting. That was a lot harder to let yourself get hurt protecting others than it is to hurt others to protect yourself. But it was a choice that Hush chose. And now I was trying to be a hero. I was going to choose the harder path. I whispered to my hands, "If you return here, you or the Academy, I will personally crush you all. I know all of the Academy's secrets and I will use them all to protect us. You have one chance. Stop this, and we won't interfere. You won't get another chance. I finished whispering as I pulled back my arm and flung them forward across the street. They were both Exami, and they would survive. Still, being flung so hard and so far would still be a nasty scrape, and a nastier reminder of both the power we possess and what we could do if they wanted to hurt us. Come on, Hush, let's go back in, I said, guiding her gently but quickly as I glanced at the Rethin device. 2 minutes left. I would need a lot of medical help to help my concussed giant girlfriend. Hours later, in an undisclosed location, Phoenix Fire, Violent Valiant, and Silver Trickster were recovering on some hospital beds while physicians and nurses tended to their wounds. Agamemnon watched over them while he evaluated the fight. And the message from Birthstone. She was one of the best students for years, and he knew she would keep her word. It was her way and her weakness. Still, the way they wrecked one of his strongest teams wasn't a good sign. They would have to switch to passive observation of both Hush and Birthstone, these coastal guardians. But if new heroes were rising that were stronger than his best, then with the new classes he would have to push them even farther and have them be even stronger. Whether or not anyone else knew it, Agamemnon was now in the running for a super-powered arms race, and he was intending to win.